Hey, with summer just around the corner, you might be thinking about what should I read on the beach this summer? So I'm here with some suggestions for you. I'm Michael Guevara, your bow tie literacy guy, and I'm going to be going over a selection, a slew, a slaw, coleslaw, is that summer food? Anyway, I digress. But I'm going to go over some selections of memoirs, which I'm actually calling memoirs because these are all by male authors. So the first book I want to talk to you about is one of my absolute favorites. It is Beautiful Boy by David Sheff. The book is beautiful, and it's so beautiful because of really kind of the ugly subject matter in the book. And that's the thing about memoirs is they often discuss some of the more unsavory elements of life. This is about drug addiction and wondering how this beautiful boy, this son, this charming, witty, delightful boy who is adored by his younger siblings, who has everything, who you've provided everything for, can dive so deeply into drugs. And so it's that journey through rehab and addiction and all of the ugly elements that come with that. Also just so incredibly written. David Sheff crafts some beautiful and elaborate sentences. So if you're teaching any kind of writer's craft, there are so many elements that you can pull from this book as mentor text. But again, it's just, it's a tough read. It's an eye-opening read. It's part informational as you learn about what goes into drug addiction and why rehab is so difficult. But again, it's an incredibly beautiful book and one that you want to think about. And as you're thinking about that, you might also pick up Tweak by Nick Sheff, which is the beautiful boy from this story. And he kind of tells you his story, that drug addiction, rehab from his perspective. So those are two memoirs for you to think about taking to the beach with you this summer. And what's summer without a little baseball? Our next memoir is Welcome to the Circus of Baseball by Ryan McGee, who's a senior ESPN sports writer. And this is a definite look inside baseball, but not maybe quite the way you're thinking about that. And I think one of the things that really attracted me to this book is he starts off fresh out of college just after graduating from the University of Tennessee and trying to find a job. That's kind of the situation that I'm living through right now with my youngest son just graduating through college and going through all that interview process. And so that's how the book begins, is he's trying to break into this world of sports writing and sportscasting. So he tells you about growing up loving minor league baseball, and that's kind of where he ends up working, starting as an intern. And so you get all of this, again, inside baseball, but it's really about the love of the game and about it just being a kid sport. And so it's following some delightfully funny stories, and again, inside baseball of all that goes on for these minor league teams across the country. The things that go into that, from the talent that you hire to perform, from working every little odd job trying to make things work. And it's just such a joyous tribute to kind of America's pastime in that game that so many love. Just gives you a love for the game and kind of reminds you about why you grew up loving baseball and those elements of the game that just drew you in. So welcome to the circus of baseball, and it is a definite circus, and this is a definite must read that you want to pick up and take with you this summer. Well, speaking about those kind of darker elements of our memoirs for this summer, our next selection is Brave Face by Sean David Hutchinson. It's how I survived growing up, coming out, and depression. And he says, one of the things he says in the book is, I wasn't depressed because I was gay and depressed. And it's just such a powerful story of trying to come to terms with that, being 19 and trying to figure out who you are and not having the words or the background to bring to that. And so it's a really powerful story with some darker elements, and just kind of learning to accept who you are and to take yourself through that journey. And then it's really interesting because you see how so much of his story comes into his other writings. Some of the things that we've featured on our blog in earlier posts, A Complicated Love Story Set in Space, Hal, or some of his other great young adult fiction. But it's a darker story, but it's also a story of hope, because you get to see how he survives that, how he funnels that into becoming the person and the writer that he is. And so it's so important, because we have so many kids who are just struggling with their identity and who they are, and this is just one of those books to help kids and really anybody see that you're not alone, and there are other people who are going through those same kind of emotions that you are, that it's okay to not be okay, and just learning how to deal with that and how you can get better. So this summer, a great memoir for you to think about is Brave Face by Sean David Hutchinson. Like a lot of kids, you probably had piano lessons growing up. I know I did, and I was terrible. I never quite got down how to use my left hand, never learned how to use the pedals. You know, I need GPS to find middle C. So it's kind of interesting that one of the books that I would choose is Every Good Boy Does Fine by Jeremy Dunk. Jeremy Dunk is a world-renowned classical pianist. I could never be, but I can appreciate. So, and one of the things I also like about this book is, so Jeremy tells stories of going to Oberlin College, and one of my very good friends also went to Oberlin and is a principal second violin with the San Antonio Philharmonic. And so I asked her about this book, and she has performed with Jeremy Dunk, and she said, you know, I took issue with him at a concert we were playing together about what he says about second violinists, but you're gonna have to read the book to find out what that is. But what I love about this book is here's this classically trained, renowned, world-known pianist, but so much of the book is really about his teachers and growing up and those experiences before or on his way to becoming that classically renowned pianist. And so it reminds me a lot of Welcome to the Circus of Baseball, because it's that love, like that story was the love for the game. Again, this was about his teachers and professors and people who got him to where he is, and those kind of trials and tribulations along the way, and those experiences that you live through trying to get to who you want to become. And so it's an incredible story. I think this is a great story as well for teachers to use in their classrooms. He begins the book talking about his parents who are in their retirement home who are taking a memoir writing class. And so it's a great mentor text for thinking about how we can write our own stories and how the things in our life shape us into becoming who we are. So that's Every Good Boy Does Fine by Jeremy Dunk, a great summer read in our memoir selections. One of the things my mother constantly says to me is, ay, que lástima que no hablas más español. And I'm like, she's like, oh, how sad is it that you don't speak any more Spanish? And I'm like, woman, it's your fault, because we grew up in this time where my parents wanted us to do well in school, so they made a concerted effort to speak English to us in our house growing up. And so that's why this next memoir is really one of my favorite books of the last, couple of months. And so I've really enjoyed this book. It is Brown Enough: True Stories About Love, Violence, the Student Loan Crisis, Hollywood Race Familia, Make It in America by Christopher Rivas. And so you can see that I have really loved this book. And it really is just a story about identity and are you enough, and what areas of life maybe you haven't been enough in. And so it just really goes through his ideas of growing up Dominican and trying to fit into Hollywood, and people suggesting things like changing his look, changing your hair, changing his nose, those kind of things that make him less ethnic, make him less of who he is. But then also this idea of not knowing Spanish and having grown up not speaking Spanish because of pressures and families and trying to fit in. And so it's a great read. It's a look into who we are and how we learn to accept ourselves and realize that we really are enough the way that we are, but also seeking to discover our roots and going beyond that, and constantly growing and exploring and learning where we came from and how that can take us to where we're going. So a great memoir for you this summer is Brown Enough by Christopher Rivas, who also has a great podcast where he also goes into so many of these subjects about race, identity, culture, and so definitely something you might want to think about picking up this summer. Another selection for our memoirs for this summer is Requiem for the Massacre, A Black History on Conflict, Hope, and Fallout of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Let me tell you, this book is packed with so much. It goes into the Tulsa Massacre, which is really what he calls it. Some people call it the race riot, but the author, R.J. Young, who just goes into so much detail about that event, really describes how it wasn't a race riot, but it really was a massacre. And so much that he goes into the how that came to the public attention through television, through HBO's limited series, The Watchmen, and also Lovecraft Country. And so he talks about those things and about growing up Black in Oklahoma and Tulsa and how that part of history has been erased, and even how that story is not told correctly. He is at the opening of the memorial and taking notes, and a woman says to him, "You writing a book?" And he says, "Yes, I am." And she says, "Tell it right." And that's really what he does. Even this idea of calling it Black Wall Street that was attributed to Booker T. Washington, and he goes into all the research and tracks down Booker T. Washington and his speeches and presentations, and discovers that there's no evidence that Booker T. Washington called Greenwood, in that area in Tulsa, that he called it the Black Wall Street. And he really refers to, there really wasn't a financial sector there. It was really a mercantile sector, and it was about businesses, and how just that history gets told and shifted, and how so many people only know about it because of television, and are only discovering something that happened so long ago. But he goes into so many other things about the struggle to be Black in America, and even conflicts with his family, and how different people perceive things differently, and education, and trying to discover who you are. And so it is an incredibly powerful story, one to think about this summer as a memoir selection. So pick that up and see what you think.